Peloton has just announced that it's going to be laying off or cutting 500 more jobs. This on top of the, more than 3,000 jobs that they've cut since the height of the pandemic. And the CEO has come out and said that the company basically has 6 months left of runway before it's not viable, or it has to prove itself as a viable standalone company. Otherwise, it's going to have to, look into an acquisition or something, get bought by another company in order to just to continue to exist. And I wrote about Peloton in my newsletter, No Brand Left Behind, just before the August earnings call. And at the time, Amazon had just, they just announced their partnership with Amazon to sell the bikes through Amazon. And the stock price had done a little bit of, it had a little bit of a pop because of that exciting news. But the gist of what I was writing at the time was that Peloton can do all these things. It can introduce a lower price bike. It can do all these kind of pricing strategies. But it's really hard at the end of the day to cover up a customer demand issue. And when you have a customer demand issue and you have, access to the kind of capital that Peloton has had as a public company, and then haven't been able to drum up demand, through advertising or marketing, then the long-term prognosis or the long-term outlook for a company is just it's tough. Peloton, of course, has one of the most enduring kind of brands, and the brand codes around Peloton are fantastic. I mean, at the height of the pandemic, when everybody had a little bit of extra money, a little bit more time because we were all stuck at home, that's where you can see a kind of a brand shine through, which is, okay, I need to work out, I need to get some exercise equipment. Well, what's the best brand in the space? And clearly, I think it's Peloton. But the error is, in making long-term decisions around staffing, around operations, around this kind of stuff, I feel like the rest of the world could see that you're making decisions based on inflated demand. And so this kind of curtailing of demand for Peloton, I think, was the natural thing for Peloton, for fitness companies, but anything, the idea that we would have stayed at home forever and that people wouldn't eventually start to, trickle back into the office, and life wouldn't, went at the end of the pandemic, wouldn't slowly, go back to some level of normalcy, I think is foolish. Probably more wishful thinking than foolish. But all of the stuff that's happened to Peloton since then, the job cuts. I mean, they've cut like half of the jobs since the peak of the pandemic, and this cut, I think, is just indicative that they went out a little bit over their skis, and they're gonna have to come back a little bit here. But I think what's surprising to me is the 6 months of runway. I in writing No Brand Left Behind and writing the post on Peloton, I looked into the financial statements, and you could see that things were a little bit shaky. One of the big indicators was that it looked like their average number of workouts per month, on their connected fitness platform, I think was falling. And one of the questions I asked was, are people working out less, or are people just less sticky to the idea of Peloton now? And I think so I guess to be prescriptive about things, what's going to happen next for Peloton, I think, is the interesting question to ask. Large companies do like enduring brands. I mean, think of Apple and the Dre headphones. I think that was an interesting acquisition, just to bring something into the catalog. Peloton, I think, it has that kind of appeal. It's a big company. I think if their balance sheets and their income statements show that, look, there's a lot of customers here that use the product and find it useful. So if it's just a matter of, finding synergies with a big company and just trying to cut costs to where they're at least, making some money, I think there is an avenue there, but it's going to require an acquisition by a big company. So Apple, I think, is an interesting acquisition. It's an interesting acquisition for Apple. It's an interesting acquisition for any of the sports brands. I mean, Under Armour, Nike. I think Nike more viable. I don't know the market cap of Under Armour off the top of my head, so I don't know if that's viable. But Nike, I think, if you consider all the connected fitness stuff that they're doing, Peloton kind of fits in there quite nicely too. There's definitely, I think, gonna be a buyer for Peloton. The 6 months of runway, I unless they get some sort of external funding, I just don't see how they're gonna turn around the unit economics. One of the things the CEO says in this article on the Wall Street Journal is that they need to grow in order to, they need to grow in order to prove that they're sustainable. And I just think that there's no growth for that company in that market. If you just look at the totality, I think they may be able to add a couple more subscribers or users, but in terms of true top line, bottom line growth, I just don't think it's there. So expect Peloton to get acquired in the next or at the end of this 6 month period, and probably for a steep discount for what it is right now. So interesting news on the Peloton front. I'm of course interested in the brand. I own a Peloton, and I do like to follow the brand, the company from a newsletter writing standpoint. I do like to look at their financial statements. Like, I think it's an interesting space. It's been a long time since there's been such a strong brand in this fitness space, at least in my opinion, at least in the hardware space. I know that there are, over time there's like the Bowflex. You see all those ads in the evenings on the television, but there hasn't been one that appealed to me since Peloton, or until Peloton. So just an interesting company. Sad state of affairs when you think about the trajectory that it was on. But also I think another kind of learning lesson, which is that there were a lot of companies that IPO'd at the height of the pandemic that probably shouldn't have IPO'd, and there's a couple. There's maybe a shoe brand, I think, that's public. I'm not going to call it out here, but you can guess if you pay attention to the stock market at all, that probably shouldn't have IPO'd, and is probably an acquisition target at some point. So there are a lot of companies that IPO'd when there was a lot of money sloshing around the system that really shouldn't have, and I think Peloton was probably one of those too. So stay tuned on this story. I think it's very interesting to follow.